Hello, I am Anjali Rajput, co-chair of Westford DEI committee, and I have a co-host today with me, Wendy Cloyd.
Hi, Anjali.
Hello, Wendy. So, welcome to the Westford DEI Committee monthly podcast series. This is episode 9, and it's a part of monthly series called as Inclusive Conversations. We are pleased and honored to be able to work with our friends at WestfordCAT in the state-of-the-art studio to bring information that supports the work of the committee once a month. And a special thanks to Nick, whose special technical expertise is making this happen today. As you know, the DEI committee was created almost 4 years ago by the Select Board and School Committee's joint effort, and in response to the incidents of racism, intolerance, and racial violence in Westford and across the country. We have been honored to work with town government and residents to celebrate diversity, promote equity, and foster inclusion. Over the past 4 years, we have grown as a group of dedicated and resourceful members whose perspective on DEI have been refined and enlarged. It was in that spirit that we offered to the Select Board recently vision and mission statements, which we are so pleased and grateful to report that they are endorsed by the Select Board as well as the School Committee. Our vision statement indicates and goes by, our vision for Westford is a town that embraces, celebrates, and draws strength from our growing diversity, is an engaged and inclusive community, boasting a town government whose practices and actions displays a consistent commitment to equity, and is known by current and future generations as a welcoming place that fosters an abiding sense of belonging. Thank you for indulging us this longer than normal introduction. Today we will be talking with Angela Marcellino, who authored The True Natives of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and Their Food Ways. Angela will be also joining us on October 14th for Westford's first Indigenous Peoples Day celebration in the town. If you remember, Westford residents voted to make Indigenous Peoples Day as a holiday celebrated in Westford on the second Monday of October. Angela, welcome and thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And now I will hand it over to Wendy and Angela.
Thank you, Anjali. Angela, it was a pleasure to read your book, also an honor. The subtitle of your book is Recipes with Stories of Food, History, Culture, and Identity. Can you share the inspiration that was behind compiling this? It's hard to call it a cookbook. It's a multifaceted book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, of course, it was the passing of my mother. She taught me all of these recipes, which I've been, making for years. And, I tell the story that I went home to work for my tribe, which a lot of Indian folks do, or Native Americans, Indigenous. Let me start with that. I prefer Indigenous. I consider Native American the user-friendly name, and it feels good. That's fine too. And I like to use the term Indian actually, because it's a somber name. It talks about our scars and our history, and I wear that proudly. All right, so no problem calling me an Indian. It reminds me of my ancestors and their walk. My mother passed away, and at the end she told me so many beautiful stories about the sleepy town that she was raised in on Cape Cod in New England, and our very unique history as the last Indian district located in the state of Massachusetts and the largest Indian district. And the town was incorporated in 1870. It's so, to this day, I'm so proud to share the story of Mashpee because so many people don't know about it. When you tell them there's still Indian people in Massachusetts, they just, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. But yes, we're here. And yes, we still remain and we still practice our culture with resilience. We're thrilled. I think what really kind of inspired me, I'll talk about this later a bit, is when I went home, like a lot of Indians, I went home to do some grant management. We now have a $17 million government center, which is kind of a mirror government as a sovereign nation. We'll go into that in a little more depth later. But it's kind of an Indian custom, or I should say indigenous custom, to go home and work for your people. We have a powerful obligation to carry our culture and protect our people. And I think it's stronger than most people because we have an uninterrupted heritage. You have to understand that in Mashpee, the generations go 5, 6, 7 deep, and everybody knows everyone very intimately, but it's a powerful pull to take care of that community. That being said, I went home and I started to go to all the local Indian potlucks. We have a lot of potlucks during the week. And I laugh because we're still living kind of as an ancient society. We all sit down and eat as a very big family, 400 people sometimes, thousands of people, but we're all having a meal together. And money is usually not part of it. And everyone is fed. We have our drummers. We have people that pop in our medicine, our chief. We're still living a very well Indian life. It was an inspiration to tell this story, of the Mashpee, to remind people that we're still here and that we're still flourishing. I just can't, let me just double check something here. It's a very interesting and unique story about the town of Mashpee back in 1870 incorporated. And my mother's experience as a political family there, my grandfather being the selectman of the town. Here we were, Indigenous people, still managing the town. Up to the 1970s, there were no non-natives managing Mashpee. The postmistress was my mother. My uncle was the fire chief. It was a big hoot. We were like a little microcosm, self-sufficient. I love telling this story, and the Mashpee story is told by so many, through so many lenses, but for me, it became these recipes. And as I did the research for these recipes, it became so compelling, I could not avoid to talk about the history.
And as a person who is descended from Europeans and colonials, colonists, I was excited to see that you have some of that blend in your culture, European culinary traditions and other connections to different lands. Could you talk a little bit about the different cultures that make up your DNA?
Yeah, I laughed. I just got a last minute DNA test like 2 years ago. I'd only heard rumblings from my sister, the genealogist in the family, and it, pegged up like 30% English, Eastern England. And that's where those people go. It's an interesting discussion. When I was working for my tribe, I was sent all over the country, and most people picked up immediately that I was a New Englander, because I am a very present day New Englander, and I love being a New Englander. And they got my accent, and people were, oh my God, where'd you get this accent? And I would tell them, and then they would ask me more questions about who I was. And I would mention my heritage, and they would look at me and they would call me all sorts of like they would be astounded that I had specific heritages such as Portuguese, English, and of course Native American. And I just found that kind of insulting, because it's such a common union on the Cape. A lot of my friends are just as I am, which is Portuguese, Native American, with English names like Peters. It really tells you who's there. But it's funny, the rest of the country doesn't really know or accept what happened back in the 1700s. There was a lot of commingling, especially on Nantucket. People would be working farms and women would die, and people, let's face it, would get together and have offspring. And it wasn't legal at the time, but DNA tells the story, and it happened more often than the greater public wants to accept. But that's what this country's all about. We are a melting pot from the very beginning. In fact, I researched that a very high percentage of Americans located on the eastern side of this country with origins here, it's a very high percentage that they are either Native or African American, but just not aware of it. Because that's what happened in this country. And I'm really proud of my heritage.
That's great. And in your book, you discuss driving around in amongst different cities within Massachusetts. We find our surroundings with names of English origin, such as Boston, Barnstable, and Salem. And then we find indigenous names as well, such as Shawmut, Scituate, Mashpee. How do you perceive the blending of these cultures in our community?
Well, it's just been I had so much fun writing this book, I can't tell you. But I remember my dear friend, I'm a big history nut, by the way. I love to research all cultures. I love English culture. I think it's quite fascinating. I went to England, and they put up the map of England. You go there and you look at the map of England, and it's just a mirror of Massachusetts. There's a Boston, there's an Essex, there's a Salem. I don't know why all of a sudden it struck me that we are just a product of England. Massachusetts is like a footprint of England. We are of English culture. I am affected by English culture. Most people that are New England, I hate to say it, we're kind of practicing English culture, crawling into dark pubs, eating fried fish and mashed potatoes with beer and pints. Come on, get it over with. We're emulating our ancestors. And, you have to look at it that way. And then the sad part of it is though, when you do see the occasional sign that says Shawmut or Agawam, it saddens me because it speaks to people that may no longer be here.
Mm-hmm. And in your book, you also talk a lot about sustainability. I grew up in Plymouth, or my parents grew up in Plymouth, and they would go clam digging, and they would cast aside mussels and think that they were like lesser food. How do you feel about these historical attitudes towards certain foods and how they've shaped our value and our cultural identity?
I think it's a really great discussion. This is such an exciting time for history. Because of scientific information such as archaeology, and then, of course, people now more open to hearing new information. We are telling our story now from our perspective, from a whole different set of eyes. And I think that it's a whole different way of looking at things. We laugh now because they're telling the story of Thanksgiving correctly, what was truly eaten there. It probably was more like a lot of shellfish, a lot of fish. The Indians brought deer. Maybe turkey somewhere. It's kind of a public relations thing for, during the Roosevelt period or something, Thanksgiving is. And then the other part of the story is the true tensions between the both parties. It wasn't just a love fest. Both the English were nervous. The Indians were nervous. They didn't know what there were 10,000 behind us. We were very afraid of guns. It was kind of a tense cooperation. But I laugh because I did read that the Pilgrims weren't really fond of shellfish. They thought it was very lowly food from their culture. They actually found eels were okay because a lot of English ate eels. They had very little choice in their diet. They didn't have a lot of choices of what to eat there. We'll talk about later about their menus too. And I try to look at both sides of the cultures. But anyways, they found out that they were secretly eating quite a bit of shellfish and lobsters, a lot of archaeologists. They just didn't talk about it. It was lowly food, and they were what I call closet shellfish eaters, the Pilgrims and Puritans.
That's true. When I talked to you earlier, you were talking about sustainable practices and how current folks in the communities are learning from Indigenous people, such as yours, about how to replicate a lot of the practices you've used. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, sustainable, if you're talking about sustainability, are you talking about conservation?
Yes.
Sustainability. If it's about conservation, is that what we're chatting about? I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
People aren't aware, but the Environmental Protection Agency, our local town and our tribe, we have our own Environmental Protection Agency. We work hand in hand protecting species that are endangered, like the cottontail rabbit. They actually use a lot of our ancient techniques, such as burning, slow burning, to create the right environment for, say, the cottontail rabbit. You have to understand that when people first arrived in this country, the flora and fauna was totally different. We have so many new trees and invasive species. Everything has changed. We are very keenly aware of the land, our tribe. We still hunt and fish. We still know when the fish count is low, such as the herring count or the eel. We understand this because we still have a very close connection in the land, and we red flag our local EPA partners and say, you've got to look into why the herring count is so low this year. So we have partnerships, but we're highly aware of the effects of the land and what is happening around us, because it's still very tied to our culture.
That brings up a good point. How can we better involve children and the next generation in understanding the relationship between food and nature?
Oh, I think there's so many. I think in the book I addressed the migration of the herring and the eel. And it's so, you can do kind of like, you can talk about the scientific part of it too, the migration from the Agassiz Sea, from the eel. You should talk about how far those eels are out in a sea way in the Atlantic, and how they mate there and travel all the way to the estuaries of Cape Cod. It's brutal to think they do this, and the herring, the cycle of the herring from the salt water to the fresh water. What a fun subject. But at the end of the day, the Creator provides us with that nourishment. It's important for people to know where their food comes from. I just came home from Germany. I was visiting, my husband's from Germany, and the food source there is wonderful on one hand and sometimes not so wonderful. And I think it's important in this day and age to people examine where our food sources are coming from for health reasons.
That is a great point. Anjali, did you want to interject any questions as we're going along?
I just wanted to ask, as we are talking about the food, is how do you see the importance of traditional conservation practices in today's context? We did talk about people need to know where the food is coming from, but the traditional conservation systems and today's life, as you said, that the flora and fauna has changed. Maybe you may have put a little bit of thought process on, maybe we can carry on some traditional practices, but how far it can go. Today's is a different time. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's so funny. Our religion right now reflects a global crisis. We hate to say we didn't tell you so, but if we all know that science is telling us, if we don't start taking care of this planet and we don't start respecting Mother Earth, we're going to walk out one day to a sea of mud. And our practice, our true religion is to save this earth. Our psychology and the way we live is to take care of this earth, to walk softly on it, to not take too much. We find it horrific when people are so selfish. They take too much. To us, we find it horrifying. It's the way we feel. I'll give you an example. I live in a very nice neighborhood now, and immediately they decided to put a fence on the beach across from me. Now they're blocking possibly an ancient footpath. Okay. Now all I can think about is, hey, I'm going to, make our real estate more money. I'm thinking you're stopping people from walking on the land. You're obstructing them. How selfish. Indians think that way. I think that way. It could be an ancient path, and we'll talk about those as well. We have a whole different psychology, and I think it's something that as we share with each other, I think it will help us save our planet. It's very serious work, and that is pretty much our religion, is making sure that this planet's here for future generations. That's what a religion translates to.
I know you've done some research about Native peoples in the Westford area and the land about that, and you're going to be talking more about that on our Indigenous Peoples Day event. I notice members of the community are interested in finding out that information, which is exciting because it's something I think that's long overdue to have that kind of conversation and open it up. And it's great that folks are curious. I know you and I spoke a little bit about Indian praying towns. Would it be okay to give a sneak peek of what that means and what that, how that came about?
Yes, I think from what I've read, and I have to beg your pardon, I'll just be honest, I just got a little bit more of a solid footing. I had some sort of inklings about the beautiful people that walk that Pacific part of Massachusetts. But I think I'm going to tie that in, of course, again to Mashpee, because you'll see how it ties in. You definitely had a praying town in the Chelmsford area that we talk about. And the Praying Act, Indian Praying Act, was a law placed in the state of Massachusetts. And the goal of this law was to force Indians to assimilate. The colonial population considered us savages, and they thought that they were saving us, and they pretty much forced us to live near churches, and felt that our only way to salvation was to practice their religion. So they kind of forced us off our land, some of us, to be near these churches. And that dynamic happened, I guess, in Chelmsford. First, and they would also call them plantation areas, which is, we had overseers. It was illegal for us to just live anywhere within less than 100 years. We were decimated by smallpox. We were very vulnerable. And then we were forced to, some of us definitely, to leave our land and our lifeways. This forced assimilation really changed the whole dynamics of many of the Native Americans. I do know that Neshoba Indians and the Massasoit massacres and the Indian Wars took place in that area quite a bit. And it was the last stand of us to try to hold on our ways and our lands. And it was we lost, apparently. And so I can talk to that a lot, and I'll speak to it later. But the last remnants of praying towns, Mashpee is a praying town. We have the oldest Native American church in the country, and it stands erected in Mashpee. My great-great-grandfather, Blind Joan Amos, was an ordained Baptist minister. So it tells of our story. It tells of what we were forced to do. And, when you assimilate, that's another way of making you disappear. And it's a very sad story.
And I understand these conversations are hard to have. It's hard for me to listen knowing that my ancestry ties back to a lot of that. And I felt a lot of guilt about that when I first met you. But you made it seem easier by knowing that your heritage is also mixed. So it's not so much pointing fingers. It's more of just uncovering, understanding, and seeing what was what happened back then.
Yeah, you can't go back. Change is constant. It's inevitable. I mean, nobody can go back. And you really, I don't feel, can judge the dynamics of what were happening. You can't apply what was happening in the 15 or 1600s to 2024. But we do have to tell the story because, unfortunately, it's a human story. And it's that really horrible topic I've talked about it's forms of genocide. Our genocide kind of was, hey guys, you don't no longer exist. That was the kind of genocide we dealt with. You're no longer here. Well, we're still here. We're still strong. But I don't want to say genocide is a native thing or an indigenous thing. Genocide is still happening as we sit at this table to a lot of beautiful people across the world. It's another group of people that feel they have the right to take one's lands and ridden one's culture and heritage. And it's happening, unfortunately, to this day. I want to celebrate. I don't want to label people by that label. I want to celebrate what they're about in other areas. I don't want to re-victimize them. I want people to be known about their true contributions.
So we have about 5 minutes left. I know there was a couple of things you mentioned that you might want to go back to. Is there anything in your mind that you wanted to go back to, or I could ask the next question as we go along?
Go ahead.
Okay. As we're preparing for Westford's first Indigenous Peoples Day, which I know many in town are very excited for. What does this opportunity for exchange mean to you as a Mashpee Wampanoag Native person?
It's such an honor to tell the story of people that are no longer here. It's always an honor to tell the Mashpee story. It's always an honor to see people learn something that they did not know. When you pass information is the most powerful gift you can give to people. In our culture, it's so different. Our elders are powerful. They're powerful because of their knowledge. We treat them like rock stars. They are at the top of our list. It's bad medicine to even be, whatever they say to do, we go do. They're fed first, they're revered, they're celebrated because they pass knowledge on. That is the most beautiful gift you can give to people. So I think that we should talk about those kinds of things, how we practice our ways. And I really feel that when people learn and take the time to learn about other cultures, they pass that information on. And with education, everything can be salvaged through education and knowledge. So I am very privileged to expose people to our journey, expose people to our beautiful culture. I think the conversation here is really funny. The conversation, and we'll have it later, is, are ancient cultures really inferior to Western culture? I say, maybe not. We'll talk about that later. But I feel most people are good. They just need more information. And that's the way I look at the world. And
I know you mentioned one time when we talked that it doesn't come naturally to the Mashpee Wampanoag, the native people, to be public about telling their stories. That just doesn't come naturally. That's not part of your typical traditions, but you kind of push yourself out of that. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, it's, I almost feel ashamed now because when you go to large indigenous Indian culture conferences, like out in the West with the Navajo Nation, you'll be in these big conferences with Indians from all over the United States. It's so beautiful. The first thing they say when they get at the podium is, "Excuse me for speaking." Because we are taking up someone's space. I'm not that important. I want you to excuse me for speaking. That's the way we think. Our psychology is so different than other people, but we are also a very private group of people. We do not talk about our religion in public spaces that much. We have some rules. We do not sell our language. We do not pass on it to anybody. We are very quiet people. There's more dignity in silence than speaking, my mother would say.
Wow, that's very powerful. I don't even know what to. It makes me speechless.
It sure does. So, just a quick question, and I know that we have very limited time. When you said that it's difficult to talk in public, how did you gather the courage to speak in public, be a public speaker, either giving the interviews on NPR or now speaking with us, or having that courage to write the book? You did. I think I heard you saying, "My mother inspired me," but give us more.
I think this is such an important story that we have to share it. We can't afford, especially in this day and age, to not get out there. We cannot be silent. I think it is everybody's job right now to look at people in a very human way. You know, your work, I'm very proud, because I am very proud of the work that you folks do. It is very important for people to have a better understanding of their neighbors and get exposed to people from different cultures. I make a point of, when I meet somebody, I'm very excited, from another culture, to get to understand them, and it enriches you. And when you humanize people, when you get to know them at a personal level, I think it will disband a lot of problems that this country has to get today. People have to, especially in this country, we have to take the time to get to know people that are different from us and enrich ourselves by learning new things and enjoying other cultures. I think it's the only way we're going to make it.
Thank you for acknowledging. I mean, I believe that inclusion is important, diversity is important, and that's what this committee stands for. That's why we are here. It's great to hear your opinion about how inclusion is important, even in today's world, more than before. And I mean, before we go for the day, quick question on any closing comments, Angela. I know that we will see you on Monday, but any closing comments?
I just want everybody to know that I hope I tell this story with compassion. Forgiveness is very big. And I also want to tell the story from the beginning, from the perspective of both encounters. I did a lot of research about what was going on with the Pilgrims at the time. And I got to tell you, it all had to do with food. Our whole encounters, food was a huge driving force. So I am so proud that I told this story through food and recipes because food is a gateway to comfort, security. It's a safe place to have these kind of discussions. So why not a cookbook, right? I mean, people love to eat. People love food. I want to use it as a prism for people to talk about some difficult topics. But I want to talk about human beings, what brought people together. Everybody wakes up in the morning. You don't choose who you are. You don't choose where you go. We have to look at everything from a human's perspective. So I hope I tell this story with compassion.
Thank you, Angela, for being with us today. And again, I just want to remind the listeners that the book that you wrote is The True Natives of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and Their Foodways. If they want the copy of their book, they can go online and look up for that. With that, thank you again, and look forward to see you on Monday, October 14th in Westford Commons.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure to have talked to you and to continue this discussion.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too.